Marchessault goodbye to literally everyone. As I put on the bottom of there, goodbye Jonathan Marchessault, goodbye Chandler Stevenson, goodbye Alec Martinez, goodbye William Carrier, goodbye Michael Amadio, goodbye Anthony Mantha, though he was not here all that long. Hello to Ilya Samsonov. That is what happened today after months and months and months of having an opportunity to re-sign the most important player in franchise history. The Golden Knights said no. Don't need him, don't want him, don't have any interest. Too long, don't want him. And they're going to say what they can say and make their decision. And we now have conflicting reports. Jonathan Marchessault says, no, they didn't really make a legitimate attempt to keep me here. And then you end up with McCrimmon saying, no, that's not true at all. He's a fiery guy, and there we are. And it's like, well, which side are you going to believe? You'd make your decision. I bet you know who I believe. I think the thing to me, beyond anything and where to start, is I don't understand what a player can do to remain a Golden Knight. I don't know what a player has to be able to show other than not being old to actually make it to the end of their career here, to actually prove that anything you've done in this jersey is worthwhile for the team to continue having you moving forward. Like, they had 6 unrestricted free agents coming off a season in which it was described as the best team in the history of the franchise. I don't buy that comment. I've never liked that comment, but that comment was made. This is the best team that they have ever had. And then you walk into free agency and you say, all of them, we don't need any of them. 6 players. Like, the roster's only in the playoffs 25, 26 deep, and 6 of them you have no interest in. And to me, the process that was described seems a bit ludicrous, especially considering where we're headed moving forward. And time will tell where we are exactly headed. But I'll get into that in a second. But like, 6 of them, 6, all of them outside of Anthony Mantha, Stanley Cup champions. All of them outside of Anthony Mantha have played major impact moments across the course of their careers in the Golden Knights. All of them have mattered to what this team is doing. And in many ways, none of them got paid something that was that crazy, over the top, ridiculous that the Golden Knights couldn't have done it. Maybe you can make the argument for Chandler Stevenson. Okay, I can potentially make that argument. That being said, this is a player that's one of the closer guys to a point per game and fits incredibly well and might not be as good a player anywhere else as he is here, directly on the wing of Mark Stone, which, by the way, does not have anyone on it at this moment. There's no one there. There's no one on the first line right wing. There's no one really on the second line left wing. There's a hope for potentially the new guy who came from New Jersey to be the third line right winger. And then the fourth line is up in the air as well because you got rid of Carrier. Carrier made $2 million. I understand he signed for 6 years. I get that. But it's $2 million. The Golden Knights still have money. And what they said, what is frustrating, what is annoying to me, is the process that was talked about. And why it's so annoying to me is because it's impossible to remain a Golden Knight throughout the course of your career. It's not possible the way that the team is currently being run. And that's ridiculous to me. It's ridiculous. And that, I think eventually, and this is probably the moment that I start to see it happening, eventually it's going to become a problem. And when you do not have a fabric in your team, when you continue to turn it down and tear it around and move it around, do all these things, you will end up with issues that you never believed could potentially be there. We have not really seen those issues to this point, but eventually, maybe, probably, you will end up getting there. The process that was described is that before the season started, that there was a discussion with Alec Martinez that we will not talk about our contract until the season is over. So there were no discussions with Alec Martinez. That's how it was described by Kelly McCrimmon. Then during the season, there were discussions with every player about where they were potentially headed. Jonathan Marchessault said there were not discussions with him. Kelly McCrimmon clarified that and then said there were discussions with the agent. So maybe he never actually talked to Jonathan Marchessault. I don't know. That doesn't really make a difference anymore. But the fact of the matter is, over the course of the season, different discussions came up with all of these different players. Obviously, none of them were ever presented an offer at any point that was legitimate enough for any of the 5 of them to sign. I don't know if Anthony Mantha got his offer when he came. Probably not. Maybe he's a different case, but certainly the other 3 of them, which is Stevenson, Amadio, and Carrier. Why is Will Carrier not being presented an offer at some point during the season that's legitimate for him to sign? Doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, but we move on. Then you get to the end of the season, and here we are now. The season's over. You've described it as the best roster you've ever had, the best team you've ever had. And you look at all of them and say, no, the only one that we will even consider, and we're probably not even going to consider it realistically, at least those are the words of Jonathan Marchessault, is Marchessault. He's the only one. Let everyone else go. I don't understand why you would even consider that. Why not continue to talk to these players? It doesn't make sense to me. However, even if that part doesn't really make all that much of a difference, because the fact of the matter is they would not have matched any of these offers that were there because they did not have any interest in giving any of these players legitimate offers, and all of them got something fairly legitimate, if not better. So the Golden Knights clearly did not believe that they were going to get any of them. But the biggest piece of all of it is, what does Chandler Stevenson have to do to remain a Golden Knight? What can any player do moving forward? And the list is coming up. We're getting there. McNabb's 1 year away. Theodore's 1 year away. Hill's 1 year away. Eichel's 2 years away. Stone, Carlson, Pietrangelo, all 3 years away. Are they all just gone at that point? Because if any of them want to get paid into the back end of their career, as many Golden Knights who were not Golden Knights before their contracts were signed, that they're going to end their portion of their career here, very elderly, at least according to the data that was brought up. Sorry, that didn't make it on camera. I wanted the data. In all of that, it doesn't make any sense to me how there's nothing that you can potentially do to get yourself another contract with the Golden Knights. You can go from being a 4th liner and turn yourself into a borderline 1st liner. That's not enough. We don't care. No interest to negotiate with you after the season. You can win a Conn Smythe, become the face of the franchise, the part of the fabric of the team, according to the head coach. Do everything that you can possibly do. Have a career year in your contract year. No, $5.5 million is too much. We cannot possibly pay someone until they're 39, despite the fact, I have it written down here, Alex Pietrangelo has a contract until he's 37, Tomas Hertl until he's 36, Mark Stone 35, Noah Hannafin 34. We can't possibly add 1 more year to the back end of that, and we don't even know, maybe Marchessault would have taken 4. I don't know. We may never know any of that. However, the overall sense of all of it is, the problem is you cannot remain a Golden Knight. If you sign a contract with the Golden Knights, you probably will not make it to the end of that contract. And if you do, as if you are old, or at least close to old, you're gone. See ya. We don't care. We're moving on. That is a massive issue, I think, moving forward for the franchise, because I don't know why you would want to play under that, understanding that there is no way that you could potentially become anything to this team or anything to this city without them just shipping you off. Eventually, they will ship you off, no matter what. No one can make it to the end. One guy has ever really retired here, and he played 3 seasons and really didn't make anything over the league minimum. So what did it even matter? And he kind of faded into a way of obscurity. COVID happened and he was just gone. And that was it. Now he works for the team. That's Derek Englund. That's it. Not anyone else can. So do you think that Braden McNabb's going to retire here? No, probably not. Do you think that William Karlsson's going to retire here? No, probably not. Should there be a statue of his speech outside of the stadium? Absolutely, there should be. but there won't be because he can't retire here. And it brings me to the next point, which is it seems like, whether you want to view it this way or not, it seems like to me, the moment a player gets to a point where they, or a coach or anyone gets to a point where they are something in this city, where they have become anything here, that guy's got to go. Eventually, we need him out. There's so many examples over the course of time, and Marchessault is just the greatest example of all of them, especially because he stood there the entire season and said, I want a lower deal, or I will take an acceptable deal with this team. I don't understand how you can make it to the end. Moving on to the next piece of it, which is Marchessault himself, which is why I have been incensed this entire time that he is not going to be there, that he is not here. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that he didn't have a contract the moment he became the Conn Smythe. I think it's ridiculous that he didn't get talked to all last summer. I think it's ridiculous that he didn't get a contract before the trade deadline, before they made those two deals. I think it's ridiculous that he doesn't have a contract now. Here's why. Because Jonathan Marchessault means more to this team than the potential incremental upgrades that you can get from finding someone else. Now, it's also important to note the Golden Knights didn't find anyone else. They don't even have anyone else. They did not add to the team. It doesn't really seem like they're going to add to the team. So this idea that all of a sudden they're going to get all this great increase out of this team because they don't have the 39-year-old because he signed that contract with Nashville, you still would have gotten him when he's 34, 35, 36, 37. He still would get to play in those times. And if you have to deal with it towards the end, so be it. That's the plan on Hurdle. That's the plan on Stone. That's the plan on Pietrangelo. That may even be the plan on Hanifin. We don't know if the 34-year-old smooth skating defenseman is going to make it that far. We don't know. We will find out. But the incremental upgrade that is potentially going to happen, that is in no way guaranteed, there is no way that they're absolutely going to get a better player and a better fit and a better person to have in the locker room than Jonathan Marchessault. It probably won't happen. It definitely is not a guarantee. So to make that decision when there's really nothing even behind it, and there's really no one even there to take over, it does not make sense to me. It does not make sense at all why that player would not be given something that he has deserved. He has earned. He has earned exactly this opportunity to get that job and was not given it. And I think it's going to set a precedent to basically everyone moving forward that you cannot make it through, even if you win the Conn Smythe, even if you have the best season, even if you are a very important person in our locker room. And to that point, the locker room is going to change in a massive way with the number of players that have left. Jonathan Marchessault obviously being the key of all of that, but also Alec Martinez. Alec Martinez is an important part of the room. Alec Martinez is an important part to have on trips, to have around when things get heavy. He's important to have there. Don't have him anymore. Do I think they needed to keep him from a hockey perspective? No, I don't. No, I don't. Would I have paid him $4 million? No, I would not. But when you add him in, and then also Logan Thompson, who was a loud voice in that room, was a big part of the competition that typically goes on during these morning skates, which is possibly one of the reasons this team has had a lot of success, is that they're very competitive. That potentially will all drop off. Nonetheless, things will change. The roster, the tenor of the team has taken a massive shift today. And this belief that it's suddenly going to be better, that it will definitely be better, doesn't seem all that likely. It just doesn't. On to the probably the most important part of all of this. I just spent 15 minutes talking about the not most important part of all of this. Nonetheless, here we are getting to the most important part of this. Look at the roster today. Just pull it up. I'll run through it if you can't pull it up, but just pull the roster up and look at it. Here's the names of the forwards: Barbashev, Eichel, Hurdle, Stone, Brisson, Dorofeev, Howden, Carlson, Holtz, Ronbier, Waugh, Kolazar. There's an argument that you only have 7, maybe 8 if you call Howden. We don't know where Dorofeev is at. there are a lot of holes in that group. I don't have a first line right winger. I have Brisson written down on my list at the moment. Not sure that that's even realistic. I'm not even 100% sure he's full-time NHL player yet. Not sure what to make of that. Dorofeev, who could only get a few minutes in the playoffs, is now suddenly in the top 6 himself. And then Howden, Holtz, we'll see what Alexander Holtz ends up being. Does Ronebier, is it time for Ronebier to be a part of this? Or there's just not a lot there. And so my question becomes, when you have some cap space left, when you have been this aggressive of an organization to put yourself in a position where your cup window is not very long anymore, and here we are in a spot where, yes, there is all this potential overspending on free agency day, but here you are as the Golden Knights with a roster that at the moment does not look like a cup contender. It really doesn't. It's very, very difficult to win without excellent depth. And that is with excellent depth, with when you're healthy, you need excellent depth. What does it look like if one of the 6 top forwards goes out? Eichel, Barbashev, Hurdle, Stone, Carlson. What if any of them go out? Now you have to put another player in there, and you're even lighter, shallower. I don't know what the word is. Not as deep is what I'm trying to say. Like, it's not going to look good. Yes, the defense looks very good. Now, I also want to note that there was something to be said today that Caden Korczak was described as a full-time NHL player. I don't know where he fits in. Hannafin, Pietrangelo, McNabb, Theodore, Haig, Whitecloud, Hutton. Like, how is that working? So maybe there is still something coming. But if you can find me a path to this team actually getting to a point where they are substantially better, even by going nuts with LTIR, if that were to happen, I'm not sure they'd actually be able to even make the playoffs if they were to go nuts with LTIR. I think they're right on the line of the playoffs. Like, I still think there's enough good players. Eichel, Hurdle, Stone, Carlson, Hannafin, Pietrangelo, Theodore, McNabb. Like, there's a lot of good players. The goalie's still good. We'll talk about Samsonov in a minute. Like, I still think you're in a position where you could be a pretty darn good team. Are you the best team in the NHL? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And that's if every single player is healthy for 82 games. I think if everyone's healthy for 82 games, you're probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 points. But that's unrealistic. That is unrealistic. That's not what's going to happen. They're not going to be healthy for the entirety of the season. And they don't have money to go out and actually help the team and get more additions. Like, there's just not much there. And then I've seen a lot of, what if it's Marner? What if it's Martin Necas? What if it's whoever it happens to be, a Skarov? Like, all of these things cost picks. The Golden Knights don't have them. The first pick that they just made at 19 is probably untradeable. Maybe he is, maybe he is not. I've been told some other teams were also looking at him. Maybe he is, but he's probably not tradable to every single team. Beyond that, don't have next year's pick, don't have the following year's pick. So the next thing that you can reasonably offer, and you need Brisson in the lineup, or he's coming out, you could consider him an NHL player at this point. Whether or not he is, we will find out. And whether or not he has to be replaced by Zach Aston Reese, we will find out. Or Tanner Lazinski or whatever. I can't even remember his name. Like, if we get to that point, what does it take to get Mitch Marner? What does it take to get Martin Necas? Like, it's not really an option. We've always been concerned about money. Do they have enough money? Is there cap space? Is there a way to do this? I don't know that you can actually get these players. And you can sit there and say, yeah, but we have extra players on defense. Shea Theodore could potentially go. They could trade Whitecloud or Haig or McNabb or Korczak or Hutton. Like, yeah, maybe you can move some of that. But when you do, now the best part of your team got weaker. So the thing that you're going to hold your hat on throughout the rest of this season is going to be how damn good the defense is. And then if the goalies are good behind them, that the defense and the goalies will make you a pretty darn good team. Well, if you go out and make the deal to go buy another player and move one of your defensemen, you're going to get worse on your defense. So even that is going to take a hit. So when you have all of these holes and you don't have a way to fill them, what is it going to look like? what is the actual plan forward to get back to making this team good enough to be better than every single team in the conference. And then at least one from the other, or I guess it would only be one from the other side. Like, we have to remember, like, it looked like when the Golden Knights lost, that they had lost to the best team in the Western Conference. Turned out that was not the case. They ended up not being the best team in the Western Conference. Maybe the second best team in the Western Conference, but certainly not the best. And then the team that they lost to also went on to lose. So the Western Conference was not the better conference in regards to the best team. And the best team in the Western Conference wasn't even the team that beat Vegas. Like, you weren't even quite there. Like, yes, I understand the injuries. I understand the fact that the chemistry didn't come together. I understand how close it actually was in that series. That, yes, it could have been one more game. Yes, okay. But if all of that's there, and then you take away as many of the things that have been taken away, making a big hockey trade where you have to trade assets off the current roster to find different assets off from another team, you have to win that trade by such a massive amount to help your team, and that's unlikely. Yes, you may win the trade, but it doesn't necessarily put you over the top the way that it does when you trade multiple draft picks to bring in a player. When you make the trade for Mark Stone and you're giving up Oscar Lindberg, who was basically falling out of the lineup, Eric Brandstrom, who was not ready to play in the NHL, and another second-round pick, you immediately become better because Mark Stone is better than the player that you're going to take out of the lineup. If you decide to go and get one of these players, and okay, maybe they can use some of the money, 3, 4, whatever it happens to be, to go get another free agent. I don't know that whoever that player is going to be, like what Amadio almost got 3 million, 4 million. So like, it's not going to be enough to make all that much of a difference. Yes, it may plug a hole. It may get them closer, but they need to get back to being the best team in the NHL. You've traded all of these assets to get to this point. You have to get back to that. And I just don't know how and what the plan is. And it didn't sound like there's much in the pike coming to get to that point. So that's where I just don't understand what's going to happen next and how it can possibly actually help the team along. The prospects are not good enough yet, are not going to be good enough yet. Even if this is a hit on this one, and then maybe you have some hits on second-round picks from last couple of years ago, Brabanitz and Demick and Cataford. Like, there are potentially options who maybe can get there, but they're not going to be at the point soon enough where it's going to matter. So to me, that brings me back to, how can none of these players find their way back onto this roster? How can you not find any of them, specifically the most important one in Marchessault? How can none of these players find their way back in when right now is probably still the best opportunity to win? Because as we get forward, as the ones that I named off, McNabb's 1 year away from a contract, Theodore and Hill are 1 year away from a contract, Eichel is 2 years away from a contract, Stone, Carlson, Pietrangelo are all 3. As we get past those, maybe you decide to wipe out all of those and you end up with getting more players that are different, but you're still now taking the most important players off the team and having to replace them. It's not that easy to replace good players with better players. It's not easy when they're already good enough players to win the Stanley Cup. Very, very difficult to do. It's much easier when you have all these draft picks and all these prospects in the system that you can trade and then get those immediate NHL impact players. Today was a day that, for the first time, probably ever, I can make the argument that the window may have slammed shut. I'm not quite there yet because I still think there are enough good players. And if some of these guys can step forward, maybe it only takes a couple forwards to get them back to that point. But I don't know how you find those forwards if they're not already in the system. But maybe it's not that far away. But as a day like this happens, and as there is simply no answer to what to do, where do you go from here makes you have to inevitably ask the question, did the window just kind of slam shut? Or at the very least, close quite significantly? Especially as almost all of them went to teams around the Golden Knights. Nashville, Seattle, I guess Carolina, Ottawa. So it's not all of them, but the two most important ones stayed in the conference. So it's like that is the challenge for me as I look at this and as I look at what this free agency day became. I did not think there was any way we were going to go through all 6 and say none of them were there. And if that was going to be the case, I thought for sure there would be something more than Ilya Samsonov. Like when the discussion was, okay, maybe it's Stamkos. Like that one, you can at least look at that and say, well, like is Steven Stamkos better than all 6 of those players? Maybe, probably not, but maybe. And then there's this issue of the deadline. And they go back to the deadline and say that the deadline was kind of the off season, that what happened at the deadline was the off season. But the problem with that is that the deadline was made specifically to win last year's cup. All of the ads at the deadline, even though in the case of Hanifin and Hertl, will potentially help moving forward and are going to be a part of the team, you would never at the deadline have traded Marchessault, Stevenson, Carrier, Amadio, and Martinez for Hanifin and Hertl. That would never have happened. You wouldn't have done that at that time. So if you look at, okay, well, the deadline is what we did to this offseason, then it doesn't really add up. It makes those moves look quite poor if you look at it that way. Because now you say, well, we bought a player in Noah Hanifin who then ends up getting a deal that could have potentially been signed today. And if they would have had all of that money today, they could have potentially signed him and not given up Daniil Miromanov, not given up the first round pick. But that's not what happened. And the reason that didn't happen, and I'm behind the reason that it didn't happen, is because you were trying to defend the Stanley Cup. That's fine. That is absolutely fine. But there had to have been a plan beyond it. And there just doesn't seem like there has been. It seems like at the moment, it's like, well, I guess it's time to take the step back. And that's not the way you can operate when you have all of the players that are already on the roster that are getting older. To then turn around and say the most important player on the roster got old and we cannot possibly support the data that he is not going to be a huge problem when he gets even older. Well, yes, that may be the case. He may not be that good at 38 or 39, but he's going to be good at 30, 34, 35, 36 as he plays the next few years. And that's the time when you still have players on your roster that are going to help you win. So it's like the step back that has happened today is so dramatic and so drastic that we've never had this. This is the first time in franchise history that this team has gone through this. And the weird part about all of it is that it's a step back away from being a number one cup contender, but it's not a step in the direction in any way of getting better for the future. That's what makes this so difficult on the Golden Knights. And also, I hated it, the comment at the end of the press conference where I know this is hard on fans, but it's harder on me. Like, what is that? I'll just leave that at that. Whatever. Don't know why he said that. Shouldn't have said that. If you haven't seen it, look it up. It's the end of the press conference. The press conference is over. Then he said, I don't know. I don't get it. No, it's not. Well, maybe it is, but you don't have to say it. It's ridiculous. Okay, but normally when a team goes through a transition, like when it gets to the point where it is the end, you can say, all right, well, now it's time that we have to find a way to start rebuilding this, or at the very least retooling this. That's not what happened today, right? Like that's not, in no way can anyone look at this and say the Golden Knights did anything to help themselves in the future. The best argument you can possibly make is that maybe there's more cap space in the future because you didn't waste any of it to help the team for tomorrow. That's the best argument you can come from. But you took 6 assets, one of which you recently paid to get in Anthony Mantha, 6 assets that you got nothing from. Like the history of not getting anything back from assets has been a problem for quite some time, but they found a way around it by having all of these extra assets that were built in from earlier and winning on a couple of trades. like a couple of big time trades, most notably Mark Stone. But there's not another win there. Like, I guess maybe the Hurdle one can be a massive win. But even if the Hurdle one's a massive win, I think most of us, when we look at the roster, look at Hurdle, see his name, and assume he's Tomas Hurdle, the good player that we think the Golden Knights traded for. That may well be the case. And even if you look at the roster that way, it's not good enough to win the Stanley Cup. Because on the first line, there's a hole. On the second line, there's a potential plug in Dorofeev. And I can't even make the argument to make Dorofeev on the first line. I can't do it at this point. It doesn't make sense to me. The only other, is it Holtz? I don't even know who plays there. I'm lost on that portion. We'll see what we end up getting to, but that makes no sense. Barbashev, Eichel, and I guess maybe is it Stone? Okay, then your second line becomes Dorofeev, Hurdle, and Brisson. Like, that's not a second line. It's just not. Like, that's a Sharks first line from last year when they got like 60 points. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And okay, Alexander Holtz, who the New Jersey Devils said, please get him out of here. We don't want him. Like, he's suddenly just going to plug in day one on the first line. It's unrealistic. Just unrealistic. He's going to have to work his way up through the roster. And even that's going to be awfully difficult because he was drafted in 2020. So he's 22, 23 years old. It's very hard to make your way up the lineup at 23 years old with the coach that is there with the Golden Knights, which brings me to that. This has been done before, not to the same level, but in a certain way, this has been done before, where the team is taken down a little bit to then, in theory, build it back up at the deadline. But I don't see a way that this can even happen because there's not going to be a lot of cap space. Even if players are on LTIR, then okay, you get more cap space, but all of the amount that you have, you're not going to have the assets to buy $10 million worth of players. Again, just not going to be there because the picks aren't available. And the first round pick may not even be an option. Arguably, you probably want that first round pick to turn out into an NHL player that you get too. Eventually, that needs to happen. Hopefully, it's happening with Brisson. But when you look at the roster, even with an excellent Hurdle, even with an excellent Hanifin, it's really difficult to look at a roster that's bottom six is Howden, Carlson, Holtz, Roenbier, Waugh, Kolazar, and say that's going to do it. That's going to win us enough games to be better than every single one of the other teams in the NHL. And we have been here before. Not quite to this level, but we have been in this point where we look at the roster as of free agency day and say, I don't know that that's good enough. We've been here before. But typically, those trades are made to then make them better. I don't know what the plan is or how you can potentially get there. And it doesn't seem like much is happening between now and when we get to October 9th when it's against Colorado. It just doesn't seem like there's going to be much there. To then Cassidy, who is now going to be handed this roster, which reasonably is not a defense-first roster. Yes, the defense core is excellent. Hanifin, Pietrangelo, McNabb, Theodore, Haig, Whitecloud with the backups of Hutton and Korzak. Yes, that can be very good. There's a lot of good there. But is it the bunker-in style that could potentially work with a system that maybe is short a bunch of wingers, scoring wingers in particular? I don't think so. Hanifin's not really a lockdown defensive player. Great gaps, great in transition, but once the puck's in the zone, he's not a superstar defensive player in his own end. Good, certainly above average, but not to the level that maybe a Braden McNabb is, maybe a Chris Tanev is. If you had 6 of those, or Pietrangelo and 5 of those, or Hanifin and 5. No, but you also have Pietrangelo, who's headed towards not being as good in his own end. We saw that over the course of this season and into the playoffs. Theodore, who's never been all that great in his own end, but has done enough to make you not worry all that much about it. And that didn't even really happen down the stretch and into the playoffs last year. So now we need some sort of a renaissance out of him, which very well may happen. I would suggest it probably will. But this isn't a team that all of a sudden is going to be great defensively because of their defense core. You have a goalie who we do not believe is going to steal you games if you are slightly leaky in front of him. Maybe Samsonov actually can. There are potentially a super high ceiling on him, but more than likely, he's not going to work out because he's never worked out at anywhere else. And every other team just wants him to go away. To then look at the forward group, and that is really not a stud defensive forward group. Yes, there are excellent defensive players in there. Eichel, Carlson, Stone. Yes, all three of them. Very, very, very good. Hurdle potentially can be very good. But as a unit, as a group, as you go down, the plan is Brisson. The plan is Dorofeev. The plan is Holtz. None of them are going to be above average defensive players, as you may have had with players like Riley Smith, Michael Amadio, those types of players. And if you go even further back, the Tomas Noseks, the Teddy Blugers, these types of guys who you can say that's an 80% defensive zone start guy, were good. You don't have that. Howden is not that. Ronebier actually is, but he's not to that level, has never shown the level to be able to be in a lineup every single day and offer that. So you don't have a lockdown defensive core, despite it being a very good defensive group. As a whole, they are a good defensive unit. It's a good set of 8 players to play there. However, they are not the elite lockdown players. To then have not the elite lockdown offensive group, to then not have the goalie who's going to bail you out if you're not elite lockdown. That leads you to Cassidy and say, well, what am I supposed to do? And this is another guy who has found his way into being probably more important than the franchise itself. Other players, other coaches have gotten to that point. They're typically let go fairly quickly, a la Jonathan Marchessault earlier today, or I guess it was about this time last night. Like, that's where I look at all of this. It's not a rebuild because there's nothing there that's actually rebuilding it. It's not a teardown because you didn't really do much to tear it down. It kind of just happened because all the contracts ran out and you didn't have enough money to pay all of them. We've known that was going to be the case, but it wasn't a teardown because in a teardown, you actually get something back for it. The Golden Knights got nothing for any of these guys. So it's not really a teardown. And it's certainly not a step towards being better because the only player that was signed that's reasonably going to even be available to the NHL roster, maybe Zach Aston Reese is better than Ronebier. Maybe. Like, it's negligible. Is Ilya Samsonov, and that's your backup goalie that has been described as a backup goalie. So then, like Zuzi says, you're in a holding pattern. Okay, so if it's a holding pattern, eventually there has to be a way to get better. And if you look at that, there's 2 guys that are coming off the books next season. Those are Braden McNabb and Shea Theodore. So that's going to net you somewhere in the ballpark of $7 million. You then get, let's call it another 5, 6, 7. Let's call it 7 to go nuts. I don't think it's going to go up by 7, but let's say it's 7. And by the way, now are we writing off this season? Don't love that. I don't like the entire season being a holding pattern, nonetheless. But say it's 7. So now it's 14 million, but you don't have Shea Theodore. You don't have Braden McNabb. You now have to replace both of them with the 14 million. That's probably just to replace those 2, going to eat up at least half of it. You now get 1 more good player to put into the roster to then turn around and have to have Jack Eichel. Oh, sorry, Aiden Hill also comes up. And if he's any good, he gets even more money. And if he's not, now you don't have a goalie. And if Samsonov's any good, he gets a bunch of money. Then you don't have a backup. So that's more money that's going to come in. Then Jack Eichel comes off the very next season. And either he gets a raise, which will probably eat up the amount of cap that it goes up that year, or you let him walk and you have to find 1, 2, 3 players that make up for him. Maybe it is a holding pattern, but there's not enough assets in the cupboard. I've done the cupboard video. There's not enough there that actually explains how you can possibly take a step forward at any point. When do they take the next step forward? How do they take the next step forward? The best argument anyone can make at this very moment is that Brisson, Dorofeev, Holtz, Ronbier, Howden, and I guess Waugh, Kolazar all take massive step forward offensively. I guess you can hold your breath and think that's going to happen. I don't. And that is, again, if no one takes a step back, which happened last season. Pietrangelo was not as good last season. Theodore, until the beginning of the season, was. End of the season, wasn't. Playoffs, wasn't. Hurdle needs to take the step back to being himself, which hasn't happened yet as a Golden Knight. Hasn't happened for an extended period of time. Hanifin was awesome here. Can he remain that awesome for an entire season? Hopefully, but if he doesn't, now it's another step in the wrong direction. All in front of a coach that I don't think has the group of players to play the system that is supposed to be played. So I just don't follow what the actual idea to this team getting better is. I don't know what the path is. And this is an interesting point. Comparing paths is going to be scary. Are they going down the Blues path? The Blues path was basically, well, Alex Pietrangelo is the most important player on our team. Guess we just let him walk for nothing because we don't have money for it. They actually had a backup for him in Torrey Krug. Vegas doesn't even have that. I think the closest path, and this is going to make everyone super mad, and it makes me super mad, is year 2 of Vegas. So it was 2018-19. That offseason, it was the San Jose Sharks. They decided that it was enough. That was it. We're done with Joe Pavelski. And think about it. By the way, Joe Pavelski played in the Western Conference Final this year. What is that? 5 years later? Yeah, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, 5 years later. I'm real good at math, especially while I'm live on the air here. 5 years later, he's still pretty good. They decided, no, we don't need him. Rip him out. That team had Hurdle, Meyer, Couture, Carlson, Burns, Vlasic, Thornton. I can go on. LeBanc was on the team and was pretty good at the time. That team had a lot of good players, but they also really didn't have a lot of depth because they gave up a lot to get Carlson. And then they gave up a lot to make sure that all of these players could stick around. And the moment he left, all of a sudden, the heart and soul of the roster is gone. And there's no way for that particular player to be replaced. Yes, you can possibly replace his hockey. I think it is possible that people can pick up the scraps and replace even the 42 goals that Jonathan Marchessault scored. But I don't think you can replace the hole he's going to leave in the franchise, the quote unquote fabric of the franchise. There is a way that things have operated, and to the team's credit, to the organization's credit, it's been great for 7 years. It's been excellent for 7 years. Save for 1 year they missed the playoffs. Excuses are there if you want to take them or not. So that's where it is. Okay, but when someone this important walks out, there will be a change. And if it's been nothing but excellent through all of it, then what? And yes, I'm aware that people said this with Fleury. I get it. The team was in a better place when Fleury went. When Fleury was traded, and I'm happy you reminded me there, Matt, because I did want to bring that up. When Fleury was traded, from a hockey perspective, it was absolutely the right move in that moment. In that particular moment, it did not hurt the hockey team at all to get rid of Marc-Andre Fleury. I don't think anyone likes the way that it went down. I don't think looking back, was it the wrong decision to keep Leonard? Probably, like all of that. But in that particular moment, it was the correct hockey decision. It actually should have happened a year before. And then he won the Vezina in the year that it should have happened already the year before. The replacement was there. There was someone to step in and do the job. There's not for Jonathan Marchessault. It does not exist. And so taking him out and taking Martinez out and taking Stevenson out, who I don't think does a ton necessarily for the fabric of the team the way that Marchessault did, but was a damn good player and was good enough to really help one of your best players and your captain and make him even better. None of that is in place this time. So all of the hockey has to be changed as well, which in my opinion, a lot of the how does the chemistry work in the room is a chicken and the egg thing. It's if you win. If they don't win, and with the roster that is currently there, and the fact that there will probably be injuries at different times, it's likely that at some point there will be down swings. They have made it through some down swings over the course of the first 7 years. But really, the hardest down swings that have ever happened forced one coach to be fired when they were out of the playoffs at the All-Star break in year 3. Or whatever, I guess it was the bye or something along those lines. You know what I'm talking about. Gallant was down. They were in a bad place. They had to do a big time move to get them out of that bad place. Then the year that they were struggling among all the injuries, they were in a bad place. It didn't get better. Eichel came back. Stone came back. They had these opportunities. Logan had a pretty good run in the goal there for a little while. It just didn't end up working out. And that wasn't really blamed on the fabric of the team at the time. But if you look back and if all of a sudden that was the downfall, it would have been. That also took a massive change to shake that back up to get it back to where it's going to be. So is that massive shakeup going to be necessary again when you don't have some of the players available that have been there to help you out of this at different times? That's what we're going to see. And so it's just the whole thing. And what makes today so frustrating, as anything about the Golden Knights today is so darn frustrating, because there's just no replacement for all of what left. And if the team had just won the second Stanley Cup, and it's like, well, we were already the best team, and now all these pieces have to come out, and then we got to replace them to get back to the best team. We're only talking about replacing all those players. That might be a little bit better. It certainly would be better because we have 2 cups behind me, but that's not what happened. Instead, they lost to a team that lost to a team that lost to a team that won the cup, right? That's instead what happened. They weren't even good enough to advance out of the first round. With all of the added pieces, with all of the salary cap being way above that they're not going to be next season, at least not to start it. Maybe they can get there by the deadline again. It's going to be awfully difficult to get back to even that point, which wasn't even good enough. That's why this is so tough. Beyond the fact that everyone loves Jonathan Marchessault, that everyone loves Logan Thompson, that everybody loves Paul Cotter, that everyone loves Will Carrier and Chandler Stevenson. All of those things exist. And that sucks as a fan, but it's much easier to get over it when you see a path to the team being great again. I don't see said path at the moment. We sit here, it's July 1st. There is time for it to all change. There is time for different things to happen, for the steps to actually get there. But why does everyone feel so damn down today? It's because of that. All of this happens, hearts are ripped out of stomachs, it feels terrible, and then you look at the roster and there's not really enough there to make you say, but it's going to be all okay. It's going to be fine. It's just not there. And so that is why today goes down as such a horrible day. And I had multiple people describe it to me as, is this the worst day in franchise history? And I still think there's an argument that Game 5, when they lost to Washington, that's probably there. The not a major, that's probably there. These are probably worse because there's a finality to that where there's not necessarily a finality to this. Maybe you do view it as a finality, and maybe it ends up being that. I do think there is a legitimate shot that we look back on this day, July 1st, 2024, and say that's the moment that the Golden Knights went from perennial playoff contender, perennial championship contender, won a Stanley Cup in it, to not that anymore. I'm not burying it yet. I'm not at that point yet. But the signs are there to say that that is possible. And what the next move is unlikely to ever give you that feeling that even I think a lot of people had certainly after game 2 against Dallas, certainly all the time throughout the run the season before that they did win the cup, but that feeling was there. Like, it wasn't that long ago. It was Cinco de Mayo was game 7. And I think we were all a little bit nervous on Cinco de Mayo and whether that or not that was going to go well. And game 6, they were down 3-2. And but if you go all the way back to game 2, in the moment of game 2, it felt like the next cup was not only like a real, like they had a chance, but it almost felt like something's going to have to really go wrong for them to not do this. Like, that's what it felt like in that moment. That was like 2 months ago. Maybe it's 3 now. 7. No, it's like 2 months ago. It's like 2 months and a couple weeks, maybe 9 weeks ago. And now instead, we sit here 9 weeks later and it's like, I don't even know how they get back to that. And that's why, as hard as it is on the general manager to have these discussions and have these players walk out, it is very difficult on fans. And it should be difficult on fans. Because everyone's been telling Golden Knights fans for years that this will eventually catch up to you. And for years, it hasn't. And it might have just happened today. I'm not completely there yet. Too many good players on the roster still for me to completely be there yet. But it's close. And that's why this hurts and sucks. And it's going to be difficult moving forward. It's because the most important player of the franchise walked out on a day that the team got significantly worse. And the decision was made by the team to do that move. It wasn't a trade. It was a conscious decision. We don't need him anymore. They can make all the excuses they want. They can put it any way that they potentially want. But the fact is, they didn't want him anymore. They could have found a way to make it happen. They chose not to. And so now, what is the road back to being good now without him? Now without Chandler Stevenson? Now without a lot of your depth forwards and one of the most important voices in your defense core? What is that path? I don't think we got an answer today. And in many ways, I think we got just further away and the climb is worse. I heard a great quote during one of the soccer games during Euro. They said, what's the first rule of when you're in a hole? Stop digging. That seems like what happened. Were the Golden Knights in a deep hole today? No. 24 hours ago, no, it didn't feel that. Yeah, it's going to hurt. Some of these guys are going to go, but they're going to find a way to keep some of them. They're going to find a way to make it not that bad. But no, it felt like today was just digging the hole deeper and deeper. And I don't know how they stopped digging. Like, guys are going to have to be better than what they're supposed to be. And they're not guys that you look at and say that's a high probability. Like, Alex Holtz is probably the highest probability of doing it. And if Alex Holtz turns into Chandler Stevenson, that's incredible. Like, that's an incredible transformation for a player that was thrown away 4 years after being drafted 7th by a team. Just tossed away for Paul Cotter. We know what Paul Cotter is. I love Paul Cotter. I'm going to miss Paul Cotter. We know what Paul Cotter is. And that team said 4 years away from drafting a player 7th overall. No, we'll take that guy. We want the guy that we know is a fourth liner. And he's the best upside option. Like, maybe you can say Dorofeev, maybe you can say Brisson, but I think there's more upside to the unknown and the guy that scored 16 goals. Like, it's going to be interesting. If anybody has questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. I got nowhere to be, so I'll go ahead and do it. Who was the headache guy that we got that didn't work out? I don't know who you're talking about. Yeah, so Nolan Patrick. Oh, headache guy. I get it. Okay, like concussions and whatnot. Yeah, I mean, that one's a little different because that was actually a trade that wasn't necessarily expected to help either team. Like, maybe it will, maybe it won't. But yeah, I think this one's a little bit different. I think you take more. You realize Ant Alexander Holtz is a sniper. Yeah, sure. I do. Will Wah play up the lineup? I don't think so. I think the plan is we've got good centers and we're going to make our centers drag along some of these players. Okay, so if you play Wah up, now who plays fourth line center? Is it Howden? Well, you already need him up the lineup as well. So I don't know what the plan is other than we have good centers. But are good centers even useful if all the wingers aren't able to keep up with them? There's really only one winger that's better than any of the centers. And I guess Barbashev maybe is better than Wah, but it's going to be difficult to find ways to get these guys to work. Alex Holt's expected goals above replacement, his projected is 0.3. Yeah, so he's basically projected to be a replacement player at like a Byron Phrase. Can he be better than that? Yeah, possibly. I don't expect them to do Brandstrom. I definitely don't expect them to do Schmidt. The reason I think Brandstrom's more likely than Schmidt is because Brandstrom could potentially go back to the AHL. I don't even think that's going to happen. But Tarasenko, I don't think is going to happen. I think if they wanted him, they'd have him already. So I don't see that happening. Who was supposedly the problem in the dressing room? I don't think there's been a problem in the dressing room. I don't know of one over the course of the years. I think that's more likely now with some more guys going out, but I still don't expect that to be any sort of an issue. How quickly will the GM be on the hot seat? I don't think anytime soon. I think it's going to take quite a while for the thing to kind of fall out. And then the decision's going to be, is this front office the right group to do the rebuild? And if you look at the expansion draft, there's an argument to say they are. So I think it's going to be quite a while. The roster's not final, but there's only about $3.5 million worth left. And there's not a lot out there to actually go get. So we'll see there. I'm trying to see if there's anyone else that's over here. Hill, Samsonov, and net. The Leonard doesn't really matter. He's going to go on LTIR. It's not going to make a difference. So I think there's an argument to potentially trade him and just get that off of there. Utilize if it's a third, fourth, fifth, whatever it happens to be. Just get him off the books to allow you to accrue cap space all season and potentially have more come deadline time. But even if you decide to go down that road, you don't really have the picks to make the big move, to make the splashy move to get you there. And is the team actually going to be in a place that they're actually going to deserve to utilize another superstar move at the deadline? We'll see. Hopefully, but we shall see. What do you think if VGK doesn't get a big piece and make it through playoff and doesn't make through playoff or does and look? I don't think the GM's getting fired. Maybe I'm probably reading that poorly. I don't think the GM's getting fired. I don't think the GM should get fired. They just won the cup a year ago. There's no way. It's way too soon. Now, if we look at the collection of moves and say, was there a turning point at this last deadline or last offseason or whatever? Yeah, you could potentially say from that moment forward, and now do we have the right thing in place to go forward? There's no way at this point you would even consider that. That's ridiculous. So that's where I'm at there. Will Cassidy change the system? No, he's not going to. That's not how these guys operate. It's not how he'll operate. He just won a Stanley Cup. He's not going to change it. There are some other ones in there. I'll say this one. I don't think Marner's going to happen. If Marner were to happen, I don't know that the team's going to get much better. It might get a little better. I guess it's possible that it gets slightly better if they get Marner, if they get the perfect deal. But if they were to do that, it's going to cost multiple players off the roster. And in a perfect world, that then pushes Hutton and I guess Korczak into the lineup. Marner boots one of the younger guys out, so you get a little bit better there, but you're certainly going to take a step back on the blue line. I do think there's a path to getting a little better there. I just don't know that there's a path to getting way better there. Same here. Okay, Sprong. Is his name actually Dylan? I thought it was Daniel. I don't know. If Sprong is available, and I like the player, he's pretty good. Now I'm questioning myself because I don't even know his first name. But if you end up doing that, yeah, okay, that might fill in that, but you're still going to need multiple players to get better. It is Daniel. All right, I thought so. going to say, this is a play. And I will admit, like, there are players that came up that I see their name. I'm like, who? But that's it. All right. An hour's enough. That's all we got. I'm out of here. We're going to try and do a podcast tomorrow. And then I'm going to be out for a little while beyond that, but we're going to keep trying to do podcasts as we go. But yeah, we're going to try to do a podcast tomorrow. Obviously, Jason's going to be fairly fired up. I tried to talk him off the ledge the entire time, and he should have been on the ledge the entire time. So now we're going to let him jump off the ledge live on a podcast. It's going to be quite incredible, and we will do that tomorrow. That's it. Good night.